Hi, I'm Deanna Joe, and welcome to my channel, Responsible Faith. It goes without saying that there are benefits to growing up in a faith community and attending Sunday school when you're a kid, but there is an aspect of Christian culture, especially evangelical Christian culture, that I think needs to be addressed because it's hurting children and the fallout is negatively impacting people on into adulthood. And it's the topic of children being exposed to fearful concepts before they have the ability to process them in a healthy way. And I'm talking topics like the end times and hell and the mark of the beast, the Antichrist, Satan, demons, that whole 9 yards. And the result is terrified Christian kids. And it makes them afraid of not being perfect enough because then they're afraid they might go to hell or, the devil might get them. They're afraid of being left behind in the rapture. And it's causing anxiety and nightmares in a lot of kids. And I just want to put a trigger warning on this video right up front before we get into it, because I know that there are even adults who have been traumatized by this type of teaching. And if you're one of those people, you might want to proceed with caution. And today I have asked a very special guest to join me in this conversation. Welcome, Debbie.
Hello.
Hello. This is something you and I have previously discussed at length.
Yes.
And I kind of feel like this has impacted Gen X fairly deeply simply because of all the end times talk that we went through as teenagers and stuff back in the 80s and early 90s. And so maybe you can share just how some of this stuff impacted you as a kid. What was your experience?
I spent most all of my childhood being really afraid. Afraid of missing the rapture, afraid of the devil,
Yeah.
afraid of going to hell. And when I look back on the totality of my Christian experience as a young person, those things are the things that stick out the most prominently, not the love of Christ, not a merciful Savior, any of those things. Um, my mother and her family, they were all very, very into the end times prophecy, the end times movies and books and Bible studies. And so it was one of those things that was always around when I was a kid. And it kept me awake at night. And, we talk a lot about how hard some of these things can be to overcome. I still don't sleep. And it's not because I'm laying awake being afraid of the rapture, but it is because I never learned to sleep properly because I was awake all the time in my childhood being afraid of missing the rapture.
Yeah.
And so it can impact your life for the totality of your life,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons why I strongly feel that teaching small children these ideas before they're ready to understand them puts them at risk, and it's child abuse. In my view, it's child abuse. We don't let our children watch like scary movies or R-rated movies or things with a lot of violence when they're small because we know that those ideas are detrimental to children and they can't understand them. So why would we expose them to these ideas of abandonment and famine and violence and all of that? That just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And the Christian community is very quick to condemn Hollywood for all of the impropriety that they feel is portrayed on the big screen. But then the reality is, Hollywood has age ratings and guidelines for kids and what's appropriate for them to watch and what's not. And you have the Christian community over here presenting stuff in Sunday school, even and vacation Bible schools that is, it's the thing horror movies are made out of, basically.
Yeah, and I think that I was born in 1970, so I'm giving myself away a little bit here. Um, The Thief in the Night series, which was really, really popular in the 70s and the 80s, and it actually is on DVD and available on YouTube, and people still watch it and show it to children now. That series came out in 1972. And so Gen Xers were positioned to be
Yeah.
exposed to this at a really young age. And because the films weren't shown in a theater, they were only shown in like church basements or in Sunday school classes or at camps. There was nothing keeping children from being exposed to these really, really negative ideas that they weren't ready to be exposed to. Um, and a lot of people don't know that some of the people that worked on those films actually were horror directors in mainstream media. So they were setting out to make movies that would scare.
Right.
And I also think that a lot of people don't understand that those movies are not made for the lost. They're made for Christians. They're made to scare Christians into being better Christians. And for me as a little kid, I didn't pick up on all of that nuance. What I picked up on is if I don't do everything perfectly and live my life as perfectly as possible, I could miss the rapture and be left behind, be beheaded, get stung by one of those horrible beasts from the book of Revelations that, you feel the sting, but you don't die. That was something I was really afraid of as a kid. And, little children inherently have a fear of abandonment. It's one of the reasons why babies don't want to be left alone, right? When they're awake, they cry, they want their mom. Little children are not ready for those ideas. And I think that sometimes the church doesn't fully comprehend what they are exposing children to. The idea that you could potentially be left behind and not have any of your family or your church family or your friends around to help you is a terrifying idea for a child without the beheadings and the horrible monsters in the book of Revelations to pile on top of it. Just
Right.
the idea of being left.
Yeah, and I think that it's a terrifying idea for adults.
My
So,
mother was deeply impacted.
yeah.
She would spend a lot of time speaking in tongues and crying and praying because she never felt ready.
Yeah.
And that impacted me as a child because it's like if this person that I look up to, who is so much more capable than me because I'm a little child, doesn't feel ready, how can I possibly be ready?
Mhm.
And in our church, the way it was taught was that every person's age of accountability is different.
Okay.
Only God knows when you're able to understand.
Okay, that's interesting because I don't know where I picked this up, but I was always under the impression the age of accountability was about 12, and that may have came from the Jewish bar mitzvahs and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But interestingly enough, I received the Holy Ghost and got baptized when I was 12. Um, I was fearful as a child. I had trouble sleeping. Um, Fixated on behavior, like you sashed your parents or maybe you disobeyed. Like instead of it just being a normal, progression of childhood development, I would fixate on that.
Mhm. I was really in that place too. My mother really treated normal childish behavior as sin. And she would even threaten me with hell and say, you're going to go to hell if you keep up that bad behavior.
Wow.
I never, even after I was saved, I never felt safe
Yeah.
from from missing the rapture, from hell. I always felt like it was possible that I wouldn't be. And I mean, I think if you look at like The Thief in the Night, it makes sense because the premise of that movie is she thought she was a Christian,
Hmm.
but she wasn't the right kind of Christian.
Yeah.
So it planted an idea in my head really early on. And our church was really, really big on lots of sermons about the rapture, lots of sermons about the book of Revelations, and children were never removed during those sermons. We were never taken to children's church or whatever. we were there. And the night that I got saved, it was one of those hellfire and brimstone, you better get your heart right. If you leave tonight and you and you haven't accepted Christ, what if you get in a car crash, or what if the rapture happens in the middle of the night? And so for me as a 10-year-old kid, that was terrifying.
Of course it was. It's funny because I had never seen the Thief in the Night movies until you made me watch the first one.
You
um,
watch the really bad ones.
that was enough for me. My mother would have never allowed me to watch that. That is one thing I can say. Mom would have probably marched me out. She would not have allowed that. That being said, I might not have had that threat at home, but when, like you said, when you're sitting in a church service, you're not removed. I think sometimes parents think their kids aren't really paying attention, especially when they're really young. Kids pick up everything. And sermons are crafted for adults. And so, you know, I don't really feel like kids need to be in the main service, possibly ever, um, simply for that fact.
Well, I know that there are people who are around the same age as I am, and some of them were horribly affected by the ideas of the rapture, and some of them weren't.
Yeah.
And I think that some of it goes to temperament, right? Like, I was a really serious kid. I wanted to know God. I wanted to understand God. I wanted to serve God. I wanted to please God.
Yeah.
And so I paid attention. I listened. I hung on every word. And those of us that were like that as children, we tend to be the ones that really bore the brunt of the impact of that kind of a message. Um, my mother also took the Search for Truth Bible study about 3 times. And we had a friend who did them. And so she would come to our house to practice.
Okay.
My
Yes.
mother would sort of be her audience. And she had the big flip book.
We had that too.
And so she would sit and they would go through it. And I would, because I was an only child in the house, I would wander in and watch. And I still to this day can remember almost every detail of some of the uh, charts from the book of Revelation and Daniel. And they are the stuff of nightmares. Like, the fact that people were bringing those flip charts into people's homes and doing these as home Bible studies and bringing that imagery into homes where children could possibly see it, that's horrifying to me. The idea of
Yeah.
that, because I know how it affected me. I was scared to death. And I can imagine how it would be for unsuspecting parents, because if you're taking that Bible study for the first time, you don't know what's on the next page
Yeah.
of the chart. And so someone flips it over and people are being thrown into hell and the water's turning to blood. And I think that, like, if your child is just innocently sitting there listening to this Bible study, you know, that's irresponsible on the church's part for
I
sending
think so.
people
Yeah.
into.
I know Dad taught that Bible study. He taught Search for Truth, and he had like notes written right on the chart so he could just use the flip chart. And I was completely fixated on it as a kid. I used to go through it myself. And when Mom found out afterwards, it was because I was afraid and I was trying to make sense of it. I mean, she felt terrible, but you don't speak up about that stuff when you're a kid because it seems like it's normal. Like, what is there to bring up? Like, this is how it is. And so but you know, I can picture certain pages, the one with them all in hell, the one with the Antichrist on the throne,
Yeah.
um, the guy drinking out of the fountain that turned to
With the
blood.
boils and the blood, and yeah.
The boils, yeah.
And I think it's interesting that the Antichrist picture, in particular, was one that haunted me like into my adulthood. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I could see it so vividly in my mind's eye. And as someone who has post-traumatic stress because of my church experience, when I would have flashbacks, that was one of the things that my brain would flash back to.
Okay.
And I would be so overcome with fear in my body that I would almost be frozen and incapacitated. And I think that those are the things that the church doesn't understand is that when you expose children to stuff like that at a really young age and it causes trauma, that trauma can follow you into adulthood. Even if you can reason in your mind about it and you know that, like, that Antichrist on the throne is not going to jump out of the picture and come get me. That part of your brain that is still 5 years old or 7 years old doesn't know that.
Right, and it becomes a trigger. And you and I have talked about triggers because it drives me crazy that the word is overused to the point where it waters it down. A trigger is not when you hear something that you don't like and you disagree with and it makes you uncomfortable, and so you're a little bit peeved and you say, well, I'm triggered. No, no, that's not a trigger. A trigger is literally a physical and emotional response to something that doesn't make sense. Like you said, I mean, you're an adult now. You know that Antichrist in the picture is harmless, but the reality is, because you had fear and anxiety associated with it as a child, it's possible that you got stuck in a fight or flight or freeze cycle there and never were able to process it. And when you see something that is a real trigger, it takes you right back there, physically and emotionally.
Well, in that Search for Truth panel, that image was actually one of the things that made me seek therapy, because I saw something that was unrelated that sort of triggered me in my adulthood, and I started to have flashbacks to that image and other images that I was exposed to as a kid. And it got so bad that I would just sit on my bed and stare at the wall because I would become frozen in fear. And at that point, I had to seek help. And I think that those are the things that the church is not anticipating
Right.
when it's exposing children to these sorts of ideas. What I always tell people is, imagine if your child ran to you and said, "Oh no, I just saw this movie with Freddy Krueger and he's going to come get me." As a parent, you would say, "No, Freddy Krueger's not real. That's a movie. He's a character. He's not going to come get you. It's okay." What the church says when you say, "Oh no, I'm afraid that the one world government's going to come get me," the church is like, "Well, you should be afraid, because if your heart isn't right with God, that could possibly happen to you." And when your church and your parents and your grandparents and everybody in your life is telling you that the monster that you're afraid of is real, that has a really real impact. It's not the same as watching a scary movie when you're a kid.
Right, and that monster could be, the Antichrist,
Mhm.
Satan, demons,
Right.
whatever one of these terrifying concepts is your particular monster as a child, the thing you're afraid of, all the adults around you are affirming it.
Yes. And that's, I think, sometimes when people looking in from the outside that don't have a frame of reference to really understand what we're talking about, they equate it to something that they watched when they were scary as a child. But the thing that really makes it different is that the church is backing up all of these ideas. You know, I was afraid to sleep with my hands out above the blankets because I thought someone would sneak in and give me the mark of the beast when I was asleep. I would cover my head, and it doesn't make any sense. This is child logic, right?
Right.
But I did that for a really long time. I was probably 20 years old before I stopped doing that because it became a habit. I couldn't sleep any other way. And I had to, like, train myself not to be afraid anymore. But yeah, it really impacted me as a kid. I kind of became neurotic because of the
Yeah.
fear.
And I mean, the child logic component is the whole point we're making. The point being, you cannot teach these concepts to children or even have them hear these concepts without it turning into child logic, because they're children. That's all they have. Like, they
Right.
don't have the reasoning abilities of an adult.
And I think that, there's layers. I think that when the preacher is standing in the pulpit and he's preaching about the rapture or Armageddon or the book of Revelations or whatever, that's one layer. It's going to have one kind of an effect. When you see it on a flip chart, you're adding the visual component
Mm-hmm.
with the audio component. When you see it in a movie,
Yeah.
then it becomes even more real. So as a kid, I just had this stuff like layered and layered and layered and layered. And I don't think any of the adults around me knew the damage that they were doing, but it was pretty substantial. And I know a lot of people who still in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s have nightmares, are triggered by these ideas and these images, and it has impacted them for their lifetime. And you know what? It drives them away from the church.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that people feel like, well, a little healthy dose of fear doesn't hurt anybody. It's not having the desired effect.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
think it can go a couple of different ways. Like, it can make some people angry when
Mm-hmm.
they're an adult and they realize what they were exposed to and how inappropriate it is. It can make them angry and it can drive them away. Also, there are some people though that are just like, I'm so scared. I can't handle this anymore. Like, I'm neurotic. I can't listen to this anymore. I can't be exposed to this anymore. And that's worse because now they've walked away from the church. They're still afraid they're going to miss the rapture. They feel like they're in danger because they're not going to church. But they also can't go to church because church is too scary.
Yeah.
And and yeah, I feel like there are so many other reasons to be a Christian
Yeah.
besides fear.
Like the gospel, just for starters.
Yeah,
Imagine the very thought. Not building everything on fear. Imagine building
right.
it on the gospel. Hmm.
I do think though, like with the going back to the Gen Xers thing, we had such a fear when I was a kid. So from birth to maybe fifth grade, that would have been like 70 to 80. There was a lot of fear of nuclear
Yeah.
holocaust and, the bomb and all of that. And so I think that the Cold War fed into all of that and it became a very prominent part of what was taught in a lot of the Pentecostal churches, but not just the Pentecostal churches. My mother was raised Assemblies of God, and she brought all of those beliefs with her into our family. So it
Yeah.
wasn't just something that the UPC was putting forward, but I think it happens in Baptist churches.
Oh, yeah.
I know that that teaching was very prominent in Methodist and Presbyterian churches.
It was a spillover to an extent. You had the adults who were themselves terrified. And I think they were so beside themselves with worry that they didn't think to hide it from their kids. And there's nothing that rattles you more when your stability, your parents, the people who they're your protectors, when they seem a bit rattled by it, then okay, this is something to be
Yeah.
afraid of.
And like my mother was definitely rattled. Our church would, like once a year, we would have a big revival where they would show all the Thief in the Night movies, and you were supposed to bring your friends and your family members, and everyone would be down at the altar. And the altar would be full of adults that I knew that I thought, well, surely this person is saved.
Yeah.
And they were scared to death and pleading for their salvation. So as a child, I'm like, wow, this is really serious. Like everybody is really freaked out by this. And yeah, it became real and present all the time.
Yeah. To go back to something you said, you talked about the Cold War kind of breathing down everyone's neck for a while, but there always seems to be something, right? The end times crowd always has
Mhm.
world event to jump on. So you had the Cold War. You had well, I remember the book 88 Reasons Why the Lord's Gonna Come in 88. And I mean, people took that seriously. They sold their cars, some people sold their houses. They just weren't expecting to be here. I mean, that's kind of the extreme end of it, but it was significant. And Gulf Wars, I can remember the Gulf Wars. That was scary. I was a teenager. I mean, I pretty much thought, okay, this is it. Like, I'm not gonna graduate from high school.
Yeah, for me, I remember that there was this movie, like documentary thing, like mockumentary, I guess, going around, and they were surmising that Gaddafi was the Antichrist,
Okay, yeah.
which I thought was really interesting because we had always been taught it was going to be like the Pope.
Yeah.
So when someone put forth Gaddafi, I was like, what? Now I have to worry about Gaddafi, I guess. When credit cards first started to become really popular and in use a lot, people were like, don't get a credit card.
Yep. Bank cards too. I remember hearing it about bank cards.
Yep.
UPC codes.
Well, and we've talked about like
Yeah.
that's a whole other thing. Like we really were taught in our church that UPC codes were the precursor to the mark of the beast. Like that wasn't a maybe thing. That was like, this is what is going to happen. And it probably won't be a symbol you can see. It'll probably be a chip or something, but it's the same thing. And so when I was a kid, I would have to go and turn all the labels away from me because it was a constant reminder of the mark of the beast, which was something I was so afraid of.
Yeah.
So, I would get into the shower and I'd have to turn the labels, and I'd go into the kitchen and I have to turn the labels. And, it was just, it felt like the devil was everywhere and God was nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you're focusing so much on the book of Revelations and on the rapture and on what's going to happen after the rapture, are you really focusing on God? You're focusing on judgment.
Yeah.
You're focusing on consequences, maybe, but yeah,
And I mean, you were a kid when all this was happening.
yeah,
You had mentioned youth skits too, about end time stuff. I've
yeah.
seen skits like if there was an Easter play or a Christmas play, somebody was killed in an accident and not ready to meet God, or there was always the backslider who, something terrible happened to them because they weren't. And I mean, like, this was the messaging. It was all fear based and it was negative.
And that's what I'm saying when I say it felt like the devil was everywhere and God
Yeah.
was there. It's like I saw the devil, when I was in the grocery store and they started to use the guns
The
to read
scanner, yeah.
the scanners. Yeah. Like I would see the devil there. I would see the devil in the UPC symbols. I would see like all of this end time stuff. I saw it everywhere, so much so that I think it made it impossible for me to see God
Right.
because I was so focused on the things that I was afraid of because they had built up this monster of an idea of the book of Revelations and the rapture and all of that, being something that I needed to be really, really mindful of.
And it was imminent. It was always imminent. Like, you hit 1999, it was Y2K. That was all anybody talked about. That was it. Probably going to be the collapse of everything in the beginning of the 7 years of tribulation. We get through that. Every kind of a little kerfluffle in the Middle East or anything like that, people get excited. And now we have the coronavirus, right? And I mean, they're peddling fear constantly online, and it's not just adults seeing it. There are kids on Facebook, and people are trying to say masking is the mark of the beast and the vaccine is the mark of the beast. It's like any opportunity to stir up fear, and the Christian community jumps on it like they're excited about it. And I don't understand, because I don't think fear is the tool to bring people to Christ. I think the message of the gospel is, as a Christian. And I also think that you've got to be mindful that there are kids on Facebook, there are kids on Twitter, there are kids everywhere, and you're exposing them to this messaging of fear, and it's impacting their lives and their peace.
Yeah, I certainly didn't have any peace when I was a kid. I was really thinking about this stuff all the time. I was constantly repenting. I was constantly worried. And then, of course, the church puts the idea in your head that there might be sins that you don't even know about. So
Yeah.
when we would take communion, we were supposed to pray that God would forgive us for our sins, both the sins we know about and the sins we don't know about, which planted this an idea in my head of, oh my goodness, there are sins that I don't know about. So
Mm-hmm.
then I became obsessed with like, oh, if I've done something that I don't remember or had a thought or whatever, please, please forgive me. I don't want to miss the rapture. And when you think about it, when you think about that you could miss the rapture for a thought, that you had, and it could happen at any minute, and it could be a thought that you don't even remember having, that can really set you up to become incredibly anxious and neurotic.
Yeah.
And I was really like that. I was just constantly repenting, constantly repenting. And I also just started to get this morbid curiosity about the book of Revelations because it was just such a prominent thing. I
Same
wanted
here.
I wanted to understand it. You
Yeah.
know, I wanted to I guess I thought maybe if I understood it, I could make myself safe.
Yeah, because I was fixated on the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel when I was a kid. And mom used to say, I don't know why, you would get me to read that to you when you were young. But I told her when I was grown, I was like, I was scared. I was trying to make sense of it so that I could kind of get the upper hand on it and figure it out. And again, like a lot of this stuff, I don't think parents intentionally tried to terrify kids. I mean, I do know that there are some who would threaten their kids with hell every chance they got, and that's just horribly abusive. But I just think that sometimes in the Christian community, we assume if it's in the Bible and if it's within the sphere of Christian doctrine, that it's fine for everybody. And I just think people don't think about it. Like, I know even myself, I didn't protect my kids from certain things, and it wasn't because I didn't care. It just didn't cross my mind. And now looking back, I think, you know what? I wish that I had protected them a little bit longer from this idea. But I just didn't think of it at the time.
I think that you don't, I think that the church doesn't think about how children perceive things.
Right.
So like in the book of Revelations, it talks about the churches and how, you've got the lukewarm church, and then you have the church that's on fire. And, our pastor would always say, you need to be on fire. You don't be lukewarm because you're going to be spewed out of his mouth. You'll miss the rapture. So here I am as a kid. I'm constantly asking for forgiveness and I'm trying to be as on fire as I can be,
Yeah.
which makes it really hard to like focus on school, focus on being a kid and learning the things that you need to learn in childhood. I was so consumed with the idea of being the right kind of Christian and being ready that it caused me to not focus on things that I probably should have been focused on as a kid. But the church really sort of had this message that like nothing else matters. The only thing that matters is being ready. Well, okay, that might be an appropriate message for an adult, but children got to go to school. Like, If
Yeah.
you're, if you're up all night because you're worried about someone sneaking into your room and giving you the mark of the beast and cutting your head off, you're not going to be fresh as a daisy for learning the next day.
No,
And
it's
so like
true.
when I think about this, it just impacted my life in so many ways that I'm sure my mother and the church were not thinking about.
Right. And I know people get defensive when we talk this stuff because they take it very personally and they think, well, you're accusing me of being a bad parent. Or I've also had people in the comment section, anytime this has come up, say, well, we're to teach our kids the fear of the Lord. Well, yeah, that's not the same fear of the Lord. You're to teach your kids the fear of the Lord as in that he's big and that he's magnificent and that he's good and he's loving and he's God, and teach them about the gospel and the good things like that. Teaching your children reverence for God or the fear of the Lord is a completely different thing than terrorizing them with a lot of these ideas that aren't about God. um, they're about horrible things,
Right.
like hell. You've got a bunch of kids terrified that they're making mistakes and that they're not perfect enough and that they could go to hell.
Well, and I think that, my message to people who maybe are still in congregations that teach these sorts of things is I'm not trying to say that you're a bad parent or a bad person. I'm just trying to relate my experience so that you can understand. So maybe you can avoid some of the things that my parents did. Because my mother, when I look back on her now, she was a product of her parents.
Of
My
course.
grandparents talked about the rapture all the time around
Yeah.
me. talked about the book of Revelations. It was always a hot topic in our family celebrations. And my mother came from that environment. And so she brought that environment forward into our home. And so I understand
Mm-hmm.
that some of it is culture and it's what you were raised in. All I'm saying is I'm giving you the opportunity to see from my perspective and maybe do things differently.
Yeah, and I mean, apocalyptic thinking has a lot of different impacts. And so, it steals your sleep and your peace and your childhood when you're little. But then, even growing up, I think the apocalyptic thinking can take over churches and people's mindsets to the point where they don't go get an education. They don't plan for their future. They don't expect to be here, right? So, what's the point? And I mean, I know people right now are thinking, well, it's different now. I mean, it's closer than it's ever been. Are you kidding me? I felt the same way in high school when the Gulf War started. And I thought, I'm not going to graduate. I'm never going to see graduation. I'll never get married. I'll never, and here I am. I'm 44 years old. I've seen it all. And yeah, if I could go back, I would make a lot of different choices based on the fact that I knew I was going to be here at 44, as opposed to the choices you make when you think maybe a year or two tops, maybe 5 years, but that's probably it.
Oh yeah, I never thought that I would see adulthood. I didn't think I would make it out of my childhood.
Right.
I thought it was that close. And you know, going back to what I was saying about people, like, I understand that it's not their intentions to harm their children.
Yeah.
One thing you have to understand is when the church becomes a place of terror, you don't want to go to church.
Right.
So, like, if you allow the church to become a place where your child feels fear, that's not going to be the place that they run to when they need help.
Yep.
It's not going to be the place that they go to for advice or whatever, because it symbolizes this horrible thing. But like, I can tell you the church that I grew up in is in a different building now. They had a big building program and they built a new building. But the old church, I still will get this like clench in the pit of my stomach if I drive by it. And I'm 50.
Yeah.
And sure, a lot of bad things happened to me there. You know, I had the whole sexual abuse stuff and like all of this stuff that happened to me there. But the reason why I feel that clench in my stomach is because it reminds me it's like a temple to fear. It's like a physical temple to fear. It reminds me of everything that I was so afraid of when I was a kid.
So then the church becomes a trigger.
Yeah, the church becomes a trigger. I mean, for me, here in the States, I don't know how it is where you are, but like if you go into a Barnes and Noble bookstore on Sundays, they play Christian music. So if I go into Barnes and Noble on a Sunday and walk around, sometimes like I just get this overwhelming feeling where I'm like, I got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here, because it's not that the message of the song necessarily is reminding me of the rapture or whatever. It's just we sang it when I was a kid, when I was in this place that I was afraid. And so now in the Barnes and Noble, my brain is like, this isn't safe. You need to go somewhere else where you can be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I logically know that I'm fine, it's connected to that thing that scared me.
So it's having the opposite effect. Like, I think people are hoping their kids will be so fearful that they never ever go out into the world, that they just stay in the safety and the confines of the church. But you can turn the safety and the confines of the church into a trauma trigger if you're not careful, and then they can't get away fast enough.
Well, especially if you're talking about it all the time.
Right.
So, like, you know, you might have a message about it, but then are you talking about it at the church fellowship? You know, are kids overhearing these conversations in other ways with the church body that is, you know, reinforcing all of those ideas?
And I mean, it's not just the end times topic. That's a big one that impacted us because we're both Gen Xers. But like the idea of hell. I mean, little kids, it's a terrifying thought for adults. Again, terrifying thought for kids. And I've heard people say, well, my kids don't have to worry about that because they're believers and they're not going. Don't you think it has crossed their minds to think that maybe their friends at school aren't believers? Or what if their teachers aren't believers, or other family members or neighbors? You don't think those things would worry a child? Like, again, these are topics that I do not think kids need to be exposed to at a young age. I think that it's our job as parents to preserve their innocence and their childhoods. And,
Well, because of that one Search for Truth panel where the people are being cast into hell, I used to wonder when I was a kid, so are the demons going to cast me into hell, or are the angels going to cast me into hell, or is Jesus going to do it himself? Like, that's not something a child should be thinking about. And the thing is I was a saved child, but I had doubt. And how do you know if your child has doubt?
well, a lot of times they're not going to tell you.
Right. I mean, I'm sure my mom was not aware of just how afraid I was because I didn't talk about it.
And you don't talk about it because you're ashamed that you have these doubts, because that might imply that you're not a good Christian, and you wouldn't want your parents to know that, because everyone wants their parents to be proud of them.
Well, and if you grew up in the sort of church that I grew up in, they're kind of a harsh bunch. So if I had said to them, I'm having doubts, they probably would have said, well, you better get your own life right with God.
Repent. Yeah, I know.
The altar then. What's wrong with you? I mean, like, there's not going to be a compassionate conversation happening in a situation like that.
Well, and then that reminds me too, is you don't know what is going on in a child's life, that events that are affecting them and impacting them that they don't have any control over. And that was something that you dealt with.
Yeah, it was. I was sexually abused from about 11 to 13, and so for like 2 years. And I would come home after these things happened, and I would pray Psalm 51. I would cry, and I would sit in the dark. And I thought, okay, this is it. Like, this is the unforgivable thing. I'm never going to make it to heaven now. And it was terrifying.
Yeah.
I was so afraid, but I was also sort of resigned. Like, by the time I reached 11, I was already sort of thinking, okay, I'm not very good at this. I'm never going to be good enough. And, so instead of praying the way that average people would pray, I would beg and grovel.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think that I had any worth, because I didn't think that I could ever be ready for the rapture. And children don't come by those ideas just out of nowhere. Those ideas are put there.
Well, in reality, a lot of adults in these strict, more legalistic groups with all the rules, they don't feel like they can do enough. They don't have any assurance of salvation. And so, why would they ever think that children would? If the adults don't feel relaxed and comfortable, imagine the terror of a child.
And I was really sort of a pious kid. So, like, I really, really wanted to be holy and to know God. And, I sought his face.
Yeah.
And so if it was making me feel that way, imagine how it was making other children feel who maybe were more interested in Legos. Because wouldn't be, right?
Worldly kids like that.
I was a weird kid.
Worldly kids that were interested in normal kid things.
Yeah, normal kid things, right? Well, and like from a very early age, as a female growing up in the church that I grew up in, we were sort of brought up with the ideas that like sin came into the world through a woman, and that we always had to be mindful that we didn't cause our brothers to stumble.
Right.
And then you couple that with the idea of you may have sin in your life that you don't know about. When I was abused by my abuser, I thought, wow, I somehow, without knowing it, inadvertently trapped this man and made him fall.
At 11.
At 11.
Yeah.
And so how do you get forgiveness for that? That seemed like such a big sin. It seemed like so bad. And so I would come home and pray until I couldn't stay awake anymore. And then I would lay in bed and hope that the rapture didn't happen before I could fix this. Yeah.
You get me every time with that.
Sorry. It really was the reality of my childhood. And I feel like now I have a pretty good grip on that trauma, but I also am not so proud as to think that it's not at some point going to come back at me, because it does that from time to time. And that's the thing that's so frustrating, is like I can be triggered by something just out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And even though as a rational adult, I know that that horn that I'm hearing is not the trumpet of the Lord, my body reacts. And so I will be sitting there having like heart palpitations and all of that. And I think that had I been exposed to that stuff as an adult, sure, I might have some reactions like that, but it wouldn't be nearly as bad as it is because I was exposed to it during childhood.
Right, your formative years. It became the lens that you saw the world through. But you didn't see it in a way that you even understood properly. You just
Right.
knew the fear part.
Well, and I think that we maybe weren't as aware in that time period of how brains work, because we
Mm-hmm.
know now that your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25.
Right.
And so if you're going along in the world and you're having normal brain development, normal childhood milestones and experiences, your brain will develop fine. My brain mixed in with all of those normal childhood experiences, they're going to come cut your head off, and the mark of the beast and the rapture and all of this stuff, and it's so enmeshed in the hardwiring of my brain that it is literally not fixable.
Yeah,
All I can do is cope with it. And that's the thing that I don't think we really understood, that our parents really understood or whatever at the
I
time,
agree.
was that they were really affecting the development of our minds when we were children. And
Right.
so I
And do
guess,
you think maybe that's why I think Gen Xers are coming through this pandemic, especially the ones who grew up in the church, who left. They're coming through this hard. It's hard. It's causing anxiety in them. There's a lot of end
yeah,
times talk, and it's actually triggering them. Like they're
yeah.
reacting physically to this stuff, and it's because we grew up on this stuff.
Yeah, and it's hard because I've actually seen this a lot on Twitter. There's a tag called rapture anxiety on Twitter.
Okay.
You can actually look up and like read people's posts about where, as news things are happening that are affecting people and scaring people, they will tag it, they'll write about it, and then they'll tag it and say rapture anxiety. And it's really interesting. The things, you can almost tell how old someone is by what causes
Okay.
them rapture anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is kind of really fascinating, because it goes back to what you were saying about how there's always something.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
like, one thing that I was afraid of that most people don't even know what it is Skylab. I don't know if you have any recollection, but there was this, like, I think it was a satellite that fell, and they didn't know where it was going to hit the earth, or what kind of damage it was going to do, or what was going to happen. And I was a kid at this point, and the church was like, "Oh yeah, Skylab, they're watching us, and it's
Oh
falling
yeah.
to earth, and
Yeah.
that's going to start everything." And it's the dumbest idea. It doesn't make any sense at all. But it was the thing. It was the thing of the moment. It was the thing in the news that they could latch onto and say, "Oh yeah, see, they're watching us, and now this is falling, and that's gonna." And so, like, you can almost tell how old people are by the thing that causes their rapture anxiety. I would have never thought of the Gulf War that you were talking about, but that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I mean, and we're not saying that it's wrong to have these conversations.
No,
If you're somebody who subscribes to the end times theology, where you believe that, you're either going to go through the tribulation or you're not going to go through the tribulation, whatever. I mean, that's up to you. You're an adult. You can believe what you want. It's just that these are not conversations to be had in front of children. That's the point we're making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, it's a free country and you're allowed to believe whatever you want. I think as long as you're not hurting others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that extends to our children, right? Like,
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
hurt our children.
More so.
Yeah. So, I would just say, even if you don't agree with me, I would hope that you would at least sit with it and think about it a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean that was the purpose for me doing this video. It was kind of twofold. I wanted people out there who were dealing with anxiety associated with the same type of upbringing that we had to know that you're not alone, you're not weird for still carrying effects. I know it didn't affect everybody the same, but like you said, those of us who were a little more serious, a little more sensitive, like I think certain personality types really took that stuff to heart. I hope that you'll realize, you're not crazy. You're not the only person out there dealing with this stuff. And secondly, is like you just said, if you're a parent, if you're a pastor or a youth pastor, a Sunday school teacher, please just consider this stuff. Just think about it, because there's nothing more important than protecting the minds and hearts of children. And we don't want to fill them full of fear. We don't want to make it so that they spend the rest of their life trying to recover from an upbringing in the church.
Right.
I mean, you've said that before. You've spent a fortune, in counseling and all of this stuff, just trying to recover and get to some level of normal.
Well, and not only that, but like the people who don't go to college because they think the rapture is going to happen, then
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're retirement age and they've been working a low level job their whole life. And now,
They can't retire.
exactly. And so, like, I think that there are a lot of reasons beyond even just the psychological and neurological trauma that go along with it. I think I would also say though that there are ways to talk to children. I think you could say to a child, Jesus is going to return one day, and it's important for us to live our life in a way that he would be proud of us, or however you want to word it for your children,
Yeah.
so that they know that this thing is potentially going to happen. You don't need to say, and the rivers are going to turn to blood and you're going to be covered in boils. Like, I think there's a way to talk about it
Yeah.
that doesn't introduce a lot of those ideas that children just aren't ready to hear.
Right. And the same with the concept of hell. And I think a rule of thumb for me would be, if you would not sit your child down to watch a movie with the same themes, like conscious eternal torment and burning in hell and torture, people getting their heads chopped off, children crying and being left behind, rampant crime and violence and all this stuff, then they don't need to be hearing about it from a Christian or biblical perspective either, because the result's the same. They're going to have the same reaction to it.
Right.
So there's your measuring stick if you're looking for a measuring stick. So I think Sunday school curriculums need a good overhaul. I think that there are a lot of stories that have been made into kids' stories that are absolutely crazy, like the story of Noah's flood. I mean, come on. And like, it's become a kid's story to the point where people decorate their children's nurseries with pictures of Noah's Ark. And you're thinking, this was like a huge killing of a whole bunch of people and animals. This is not what you want on your new baby's wall. But it's just normalized.
Ask questions. So, like, if you're sending your children to, let's say, I went to teen camp, right, at the
Mm-hmm.
UPC campground. Ask questions. Find out, what are you going to be doing that week? What are the kids going to be doing? Because I know I've heard a lot of stories where people who have trauma around, especially around the Thief in the Night movies, and those older people who are running those camps, they're like, oh, the Left Behind movies will scare you, but I got something that's really going to scare you. They will expose children to those sorts of things, and the parents might not even know that their children are being exposed.
Right.
And so they send their kids to camp. And I know I heard one story of a young woman who went and they showed those films, and then they tricked the children into thinking they had been left behind. They had people come in military clothes and shuffle them off into a room, and we're interrogating them about their beliefs, and it was like this whole thing. And I mean, she still has nightmares.
I would imagine that was downright abusive,
And then
spiritual
they come
abuse.
in and say, "Oh no, it's okay, this was just something we were doing to sort of show you what it was going to be like." And so find out, like, what are you going to be talking about this week? What are you going to be preaching about this week? If your kid's going to like a lock-in, a
Yeah.
youth lock-in or something, are you going to be showing movies? What movies are you going to be showing? Because I think that we assume that if we leave our children with people who are Christians, that what they're going to be doing is in the best interest of our children, but that isn't always the case.
No, that's
So
right. And I think that, well, some parents might say, well, what is appropriate for them to be taught in Sunday school? Well, there's plenty of things. Teach them about the gospel, teach them about the love of God, teach them about helping people, teach them about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace. There's all kinds of things you can teach them. You can find ways for them to maybe help the elderly in their community. Just doing good and loving Jesus, and teach them how to pray and things like that. Like, I don't understand why this other stuff has to be woven into curriculums. And it's funny, you were mentioning camps. Like, I know of a couple of different scenarios at UPC children's camps where the evangelist would get up and preach that you need the Holy Ghost, because that's a big thing. They want the kids all speaking in tongues. They don't believe that you have the Holy Spirit until you speak in tongues. That's the belief of their group. And so it's like bragging rights for an evangelist if they can go away and say, X amount of kids got the Holy Ghost at camp and everyone's excited. But what they don't tell you is that they get up and they preach that you need the Holy Ghost in order to be saved, and you've already got a bunch of kids who are terrified of hell. And I have seen it myself, kids up sobbing and crying and very strained because they're scared. And so you'll have the evangelist go away and brag about his numbers, but you'll also have kids go home from that camp who were not able to receive, and they will go home and lose sleep. I know of different kids who went home from camp and were terrified and had nightmares and laid in bed and cried because they were scared that the Lord was going to come while they were sleeping, or that they might die in their sleep.
that's because, and those ideas don't just get pulled out of the ether. Those ideas are put there. I mean, they would tell us, what if you die in your sleep? What if you get
Yeah.
then on the way home? What if the rapture happens and you're asleep? Like, you're going to wake up and there's not going to be anybody in your house. And like, they put those ideas there. And I can say that from my own salvation experience, the message that was preached on the night that I was saved was, your name is written on the gates of hell until Jesus takes it off.
That's ridiculous.
And I was terrified. And I went down to the altar and I was immediately surrounded by
Oh,
women
yeah. The
who
swarm.
were very loudly speaking in tongues in my ear and just sort of rocking me back and forth. And it was like a
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. And I was scared. I couldn't have gotten out of that situation if I had wanted to. And although I believe that I had an authentic experience, I know of people who say they really think that they faked speaking in tongues
Yeah.
just to sort of get out of that kind of situation. And do you really want to put kids in a situation where they feel like they have to do that?
Well, I mean, where in scripture was anything about salvation ever high pressure and intensity and fear based and just pressure? It wasn't. And I would also say that your pastor's sermon was completely unbiblical and
Oh, yeah.
absolutely insane. He just made that up. Your name's written on the gates of hell. What a dumb
Well, I
idea.
had nightmares about that too for years afterwards, of these like gates and my name, and like the devil was, in my nightmares, and it was bad. And I was a good kid. Like, I never
Yeah.
got in trouble. I never got called into the office. I got good grades. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I was, I might have been sassy from time to time, but like that was probably the greatest of all my sins.
Ins.
I did sneak to watch TV occasionally. The church would have frowned upon, but like, I wasn't the type of kid who was constantly being disciplined, and maybe
Yeah.
that would put that idea into my head. I just really wasn't, but and that was not the first time I had heard a message like that. I had heard a lot of messages like that. And I can remember to this day sitting in the pew, and I was on the inside aisle. We had a long aisle in the middle of the pews that would go down to the front. And I was too afraid to move, but I was too afraid to not move. I was too afraid to not go down to the altar, but I was also really afraid to go down to the altar. And is that really what you want the beginning of your child's salvation experience to be? Like, that's my memory,
Yeah.
being terrified and having these women with me. And yeah. And then, that feeling, that euphoria of speaking in tongues and getting baptized and feeling like you have this like new soul. Um, that doesn't last.
No, and some of it can be just relief.
Mhm.
If this is something you've been trying to make happen for a while, and if you have fear propelling it forward, when you finally achieve that thing that you think is going to be your salvation from the thing you're terrified of, there's some relief associated with that as well.
And
Short lived.
I think that sometimes that's what keeps people hooked is the fear. So you go down to the altar and you have this euphoric experience that's going to wear off,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it's like a chemical reaction in part. And when you don't feel that way anymore, then you feel like you're not good with God. So then that takes you back down to the altar, because so much of what they base salvation on is a feeling.
Oh, so much about feelings.
And so when you're a child who's worried about being left behind, for me, whenever I wasn't feeling on fire and feeling euphoric, I thought that I wasn't right with God. And so I
Yeah.
was always chasing that feeling to feel right because I was so afraid of being left. And also, I think that they plant seeds that inadvertently that they don't have the answer for. So I think you and I talked about this before when we would watch The Thief in the Night. There's a scene where a woman is trying to get medical attention for her baby,
Mm-hmm.
and they turn her away because she doesn't have the mark of the beast, and the baby's obviously like starving and crying. And so I said to them, to the adults in my life, I said, so there's going to be babies after the rapture. Are those babies that are born after the rapture, or are those babies that didn't make the rapture? Like, where did the babies come from?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my mind was going in all sorts of crazy directions, because I'm like, well, if Jesus is gone from the earth after the rapture, then how does that baby have any chance of salvation?
Right.
And so I was asking all of these questions, and they were like, you're just going to have to trust that God is just. And someday when you get to heaven, you can ask him your questions. Well, that wasn't comforting to me. I was really
No.
concerned of the starving babies in the
Mm-hmm.
tribulation. And that idea is not in the Bible. Like, it's not talked about in the book of Revelations, but they allowed that idea in by showing these movies, and then didn't have an answer when I, as a child, was like, but what about the babies? I was really like, that kept me awake at night. That scene with that mother not being able to get help for her baby, that scene scared me, like at a very visceral level. I just couldn't imagine a starving baby. Like, my child's heart was really impacted by that.
Yeah.
And it's not in the Bible, but they introduced that idea, and then they kept showing it. They kept showing the films like once a year, it would get reinforced, but then they couldn't give me answers about, and that's where the whole age of accountability talk, like discussion, came up, because I'm like, so children go up in the rapture until what age?
Mm-hmm.
Because as a kid, I'm trying to suss out, am I safe? Am I not safe? Can I push worrying about this for a little bit. Like I'm trying to figure it out, and they just didn't have any answers for me. The answer was always, you just have to believe that God is just and that you're going to be okay. And it's like, well, but then you're over here preaching about backsliding and missing the rapture. And
Right. Over the teeny tiniest little infraction sometimes, depending on the church you grew up in. And
yes.
so you did walk around with this fear of being left behind all the time because it was
Mhm.
so easy to fall out of grace.
Right, right. And I think that's one thing that I've really had to explain to Christians in my life who didn't grow up the same way that I did, is
Hmm.
that I was really brought up with this idea that you can very easily lose your salvation
Yes.
and have to seek it out again. And so when you have that idea in place and then you introduce the idea of hell and the rapture and the end times and all of that, um and then you also say that, God is going to allow people to be deceived
Hmm.
in the end times. Like I'm like, oh no, am I going to be one of those people? Like, what if I'm deceived and I don't even know I'm deceived, because I might not know because I'm deceived. So
Right.
like, but like it just introduced all of this thinking. And I think that as an adult, you might be able to figure that idea out.
Hmm.
But at 8, I I couldn't. I
Yeah, at
just
8, you're walking around a nervous wreck. And, like, I mean, I can remember my mom was always home when I came home from school. She was a stay at home mom. And so one day I came home, I was in elementary school, and mom wasn't there. The door was unlocked. Mom wasn't there. I mean, that was huge. Mom was always there. And what had happened was my mom had walked down to my grandmother's house for something, and she was on her way walking back. My grandmother lived next door, and the bus was a few minutes early. Mom was a few minutes late. It was no big thing. But when I walked in the door and I was like, Mom, Mom, and she wasn't there, my immediate thought was, the rapture's happened and I've been left behind. And I was a kid who gave my heart to Christ when I was 5. I loved the Lord. I was a good kid. I always wanted to do what was right. And I was, like you said, very pious, very serious about the things of God, even as a small child. But my first thought was, the rapture's happened and I've been left behind.
Mhm.
Now, why would my mind go there? Because, for one, I grew up in a church that didn't necessarily present any assurance of salvation, and there were a million ways to offend. But number two is my child brain could not process all these ideas and make it so that it made sense.
Mhm.
So you just walked around kind of nervous all the time.
So I was about 7, and my mother, she went next door to her best friends just for a minute, like, and we lived in an apartment building, so it was just across the hall. And I was playing underneath a plastic sled. So I don't know what I was doing, but it was one of those long toboggan like plastic sleds, and I fell asleep
Okay.
on the sled. And my mother came home and she couldn't find me, and she was hysterical. She was screaming and crying. The neighbor lady came over who was also a believer, and they were looking for me everywhere and calling for me. And my mother, she didn't think like, oh, I should call the police. Maybe she was kidnapped. She thought I was raptured. That was the assumption, was that I was raptured. So I wake up to all of these adults weeping and upset and just like having a fit. And my mother held me so tight and she was just shaking. And she's like, I thought you were raptured. I thought I was left behind. You scared me. And in that moment, it cemented in my mind how real this all was.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just my mom, who I thought was a little bit mentally unstable, but it was our neighbor lady and her husband and her teenagers. Like, there were people in my house who were like having conversations about, did the rapture happen? Did we miss it?
Hmm.
And I woke up to that. And so that really drove the point home that the adults in my life, they really believe this.
Yeah. And if it scares them, it must be worse than what I even think. Yeah.
And I remember
Well,
saying to my
yeah.
grandmother, I was like, I have a plan. Like, I'm going to dig a hole
Mm-hmm.
earth, and I'm going to like live in it. If I miss the rapture, I'm just going to be like in a cave. And my grandmother said, oh no, they're going to have equipment that can see through anything. So if you're, because the Bible talks about how you won't be able to hide, right?
Right. Yeah.
So she's like, if you're in the ground, they'll be able to see you and they'll just dig you right up. And I was like, well, what if I hide in a cave? Well, no, they'll be able to see through like rocks and walls. And but this was the same woman who also believed that the government was watching us through our microwave, because her pastor told her that microwaves, and this again, sign of the times, I'm 50.
My,
This was a thing in the area that I lived in when microwaves first became popular, was that the government was going to use them to observe us in our homes.
yeah.
And so my grandmother wouldn't have a microwave in her house. And so she told me that. So as a kid, I'm like, oh, so I'm not going to be able to find a place to hide.
So your solution for your danger was taken away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, these sound like funny, cute stories, and we chuckle about them now because we're grown and we look back, but they were very real fear at the time, and they impacted us. And so, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I may laugh about them now, but some of that is a coping mechanism, right?
right, same.
It's a very real thing to me. Like, even
Mhm.
though I no longer believe in that, um, it's as real to me as it was when I was a kid. One of the things that people don't understand about PTSD, and why I think that this video is so important, because you really don't want your kid to have this, is that the present becomes the past becomes the present. The
Right.
things that terrorized me as a child are present all the time. They're not in the past. My brain won't let them be in the past. You don't want that for your kids. You really, really don't. You know, as good as I am and as good as I feel, I'm not ever going to not have this. I
Right.
can only get better at coping with it.
And you've worked very hard to get
And I've worked very hard.
very
Yes.
hard. Yeah.
Very hard. And I think that the thing that you said about Gen X is true, that we were sort of primed, we were the perfect generation, but they're still teaching this stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, like this is kind of the point of this video is I think it's timely because right now the coronavirus stuff and the pandemic is being talked to death in light of end times.
I've seen people talking about the vaccine being an injectable mark of the beast.
Yeah.
And
As if you're going to be tricked into taking the mark of the beast. That's biblical.
well,
But
and so, I always remind them, right hand or forehead? Are you getting a shot in your forehead?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's there and people are talking about it. And so here's the thing. Again, we're not saying that you shouldn't be wary of governments taking more control than they should have. I mean, nobody trusts the government. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. You keep an eye on them. But the reality is these are conversations that are absolutely fine to have with your adult friends. Just the only thing that Debbie and I are asking is that you please be careful what your children are overhearing. They hear more than you think they hear. They're seeing more than you think they see. And especially in times like this, it's good to be extra careful because I think kids can pick up on the unsettled feeling just in society right now. I mean, adults are a little bit rattled. Things aren't normal. People are dealing with mental health issues and stuff. And kids are dealing with mental health issues. And that doesn't need to be an added layer on everything that kids are already having to deal with right now.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess this would be a good place to wrap this up. And if you're mad at me, I'm sure you're going to let me know in the comments section. And
I'll let you.
okay. I'm getting used to it. Go ahead. Let me know. Feel free to drop your own story in the comment section. Share. You have no idea how much just sharing details might might kind of turn a light on for somebody else and them think, oh my word, I felt the exact same way. And it's helpful, it's comforting and soothing for people to not feel alone in these things. And so if you want to drop your story in the comment section, we would love to hear that. And I just appreciate you watching. And if you like this video, you can hit like. And if you want to subscribe, YouTube will let you know when I post a new one. And Debbie, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and talking with me about this topic. I know this is something near and dear to both of us, so I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me. I always like talking to you.
Yes, me too. So anyway, again, thanks for watching everyone, and I hope you have a great day.